He built an empire with his own hands, yet inside him there was still an emptiness that success could not fill. On an ordinary rainy day, 3 orphaned babies crossed his path, and something inside him awoke. From that unlikely encounter, his life turned upside down, and an unexpected love began to bloom where he least expected. But when the truth behind a false smile threatens to destroy everything, fate demands the courage to protect those who truly matter. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. Robert Miller never imagined he would get to where he was. Born in Brixton, South London, he grew up watching his father leave before sunrise to work as a bricklayer and return when night had already fallen over the city. His mother sewed clothes at home, surrounded by colourful scraps of fabric and the constant noise of the old machine that complained with every stitch. It was a simple life, where every pound had a specific purpose and dreams had to wait in line, behind the month's bills. Robert was the eldest of 3 siblings. He learned early on that he needed to help. At 12, he was already carrying bags at the local market, earning a few coins that he would deliver straight into his mother's hands. She always smiled, even when tired, and put that money away with an affection that Robert never forgot. At 15, he got a job at a mechanic's workshop. His hands were stained with grease, but his heart pounded with the certainty that he was building something greater. What set Robert apart from the other boys in the neighborhood wasn't talent or luck. It was a hunger for change. While some settled into the difficult routine, he observed everything around him with watchful eyes. He noticed patterns, understood needs, and saw opportunities where others saw only problems. When he turned 18, he took all the savings he had gathered over years of work and opened a small auto parts shop in a modest commercial spot in Camden Town. It was a cramped space, with shelves he built himself and a door that creaked every time someone entered. In the first few months, business was slow. There were days he sat behind the makeshift counter, looking out at the empty street and wondering if he had made the right choice. But Robert had something no money could buy: unwavering determination. He would get up early, clean the shop, carefully organize every part, and treat each customer as if they were the most important person in the world. And slowly, very slowly, people started to come back, not for the variety of products, which was limited, but for the trust that Robert inspired. Over time, the shop grew. Robert invested every spare penny in expanding his stock, improving customer service, and learning more about the market. 5 years later, he had 3 shops scattered across the city. 10 years later, he was running a respected auto parts chain with 15 locations and a team of over 100 employees. But Robert never forgot where he came from. He treated every employee with respect, paid fair wages, and always said that success without dignity is worthless. By the time he turned 40, Robert was already considered a successful businessman. His story was told at conferences, his opinion was sought in business meetings, and his name was synonymous with overcoming adversity and honest work. He had an elegant penthouse in Kensington, imported cars in the garage, and designer clothes in his wardrobe. He had everything he had once dreamed of and much more than he had ever imagined possible. But there was an immense void that no material achievement could fill. Robert wanted to be a father. This desire was born in his childhood, when he saw how his own father, despite his exhaustion, always found the energy to play with his children before bed. Robert wanted to replicate that love, to have someone to tell stories to before turning off the light, to feel the tight hug of a child who believed he was the strongest hero in the world. For years, he thought he would find a partner to share this dream with. He went out with a few women, tried to build relationships, but always ran into the same problem: his intense routine, the accumulating commitments, the last-minute trips, the meetings that stretched late into the night. No relationship survived the hurricane that was Robert Miller's life, and he didn't want to pretend to be someone he wasn't, just to have company. He wanted something real or nothing at all. It was on a rainy Tuesday in August that everything changed. Robert was returning from a tense meeting with investors and was mentally exhausted. London's heavy traffic made everything even more irritating. As he passed along King's Road, he saw a discreet sign: Sweet Comfort Home, Children's Care Institution. To this day, he can't explain what happened. It was as if an invisible force had turned the steering wheel. He parked his imported car in front of the faded blue gate and stood there for a few minutes, listening only to the sound of the rain hitting the windscreen. He got out of the car without much thought and rang the bell. ATE, woman of about 60, with grey hair tied in a bun, opened the gate with a tired but genuine smile. Robert said he would like to see the place. She looked at him with some suspicion. After all, it wasn't common to see a man in a rain-soaked Italian suit asking to enter an orphanage without an appointment. But something in Robert's eyes must have conveyed sincerity, because she opened the gate and invited him in. The place was simple but clean. Walls painted in cheerful colors, children's drawings taped up, toys organized in cardboard boxes. It smelled of washing, powder and home-cooked food. There were children playing in a large room, some running, others drawing on the floor, all with that unique energy that only childhood has. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. How many difficult stories lived here? How many dreams were kept in those little hearts? The lady, who introduced herself as Mrs. Margaret, the institution's director, offered him coffee and began to talk about the work they did. She explained the difficulties, the lack of resources, the immense love they had for the children. Robert listened attentively, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the emptiness of his huge house, the rooms that were never used, the loneliness that accompanied him even when surrounded by people. It was then that they heard crying coming from the corridor. Mrs. Margaret apologized and excused herself. Robert followed her instinctively. They reached a smaller, more private room where there were 3 cots side by side, and inside them 3 identical babies were crying with that desperate intensity of newborns. 3 girls wrapped in slightly faded pink blankets with red faces and clenched fists. Mrs. Margaret picked one of them up and began to rock her. Robert stood frozen in the doorway, mesmerized by the scene. He asked about the babies and heard a story that broke his heart in 2. The triplets had arrived at the institution just 2 days earlier. The mother was a 22-year-old young woman with no family, no resources, who did not survive the complications of childbirth. She had left the girls alone in the world before she could even look into their eyes. Robert felt tears burn his eyes. He was not a man who cried, but at that moment he couldn't hold them back. He asked to hold one of the babies. Mrs. Margaret hesitated for a second but handed the little girl into his arms. She was so small, so fragile, so perfectly helpless. Robert looked at that little face and felt something he had never felt before, an instant connection, a calling that came from somewhere deep in his soul. He looked at the other 2 in their cots, and an absolute certainty took hold of him. He couldn't leave there and leave those girls behind. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen them, that he hadn't felt that tightness in his chest, that he hadn't heard the silent call of destiny. He asked Mrs. Margaret about the adoption process. She explained that it was long, bureaucratic, full of steps. Robert said he didn't care. He said he would do whatever was necessary. He said those 3 girls would be his daughters. Mrs. Margaret was surprised but also moved. She explained that adoptions of triplets were extremely rare because people feared they couldn't cope. Robert looked at her with a determination that the woman immediately recognized. It was the same determination he used to build his business empire, but this time directed towards something infinitely more important. The following months were intense. Robert hired the best family law solicitors, gathered all the necessary documentation, and went through psychological assessments, interviews, and home visits. He completely renovated an entire floor of his penthouse to welcome the girls. 3 identical rooms decorated with love and care, each with a different theme so the girls could develop their individuality. He bought cots, clothes, toys, and nappies. He read dozens of books on parenting, watched videos, talked to pediatricians, and took courses in infant first aid. His partners and friends thought he had gone mad, a single man focused only on work his entire life, deciding to adopt 3 babies at once. But Robert didn't care about their opinions. He knew what he was doing. He knew that those 3 girls were his destiny. Finally, after 5 agonizing months of waiting, the court order was granted. Robert will never forget the day he walked into that orphanage as a visitor and walked out as a father. Mrs. Margaret was emotional, hugged Robert tightly, and wished him all the luck in the world. The triplets, now 6 months old, were placed in car seats and taken home. Robert decided to give them names that signified hope and new beginnings. The first to be born he named Laura, which means victorious. The second, Marina, which alludes to the sea and the immensity of possibilities. The third, Helena, which means bright light. Laura, Marina, and Helena Miller. 3 lives starting from scratch, with a father who promised himself he would give them everything he never had, and much more. The first few months were challenging. Robert discovered that being a father didn't come with an instruction manual. He learned to change nappies in the middle of the night, to prepare bottles at the right temperature, to identify each type of cry, and understand what each one meant. He slept little, worked less, and prioritized the girls above all else. His businesses continued to run because he had built a competent team, but his presence at meetings and events decreased drastically. Robert realized he needed help, not because he couldn't cope, but because he wanted to ensure the girls had constant, high-quality attention, especially when he had to be away for unavoidable work matters. That's how he met Julia Smith. Julia was 26 years old and came from Tottenham, North London. Like Robert, she was well acquainted with the reality of the city's outskirts, the difficulties, the daily struggles. She had studied education at a public university, working during the day and studying at night, balancing books and bills with a skill that only those who need to survive develop. Her specialization was early childhood education, and she had a genuine passion for children. Her CV was impeccable, and her references spoke of a dedicated and caring professional. But what won Robert over wasn't her CV. It was the way Julia looked at the triplets during the first interview. She knelt down to the level of the cots, smiled with a natural sweetness, and spoke to them as if they were complete people, not just babies. Laura reached out her tiny hand and grabbed Julia's finger. It was love at first sight, one of those instant and true kinds. Robert hired Julia that same day. He explained that she wouldn't just be a nanny or an employee. She would be a part of the girls' lives, someone he would trust with his most precious treasures. Julia understood the responsibility and accepted it with seriousness. They agreed that she would live in a comfortable room in the penthouse during the week and return to visit her own family on weekends. Living together proved to be perfect from the start. Julia had infinite patience, a charming creativity for dealing with tantrums and tears, and a playful way of turning every moment into a learning experience. She sang lullabies with a soft voice, told made-up stories where the 3 sisters were always the heroines, and played on the floor without caring about getting her clothes dirty. Robert watched all of this with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. Julia didn't just care for the girls, she truly loved them. He saw it in the small details, in the way she adjusted Marina's blanket before she slept, in the way she combed Laura's hair carefully so as not to pull it, in the special attention she gave to Helena, who was a little quieter than her sisters. The years passed like pages in a beautiful book. The girls grew up healthy, talkative, and full of personality. Laura was the natural leader, always organizing games and defending her sisters. Marina was the dreamer, living in a world of imagination, creating fantastic stories about princesses and dragons. Helena was the observer, calmer, but with an emotional intelligence that was impressive for her age. When the triplets turned 5, Robert organized a party that remained in everyone's memory. He rented out an entire children's party venue, invited all the children from the neighborhood and also those from the orphanage where it all began. Mrs. Margaret was there, seeing those 3 babies who had arrived so fragile now, running and laughing with a contagious vitality. She hugged Robert and said that he had done much more than adopt 3 children. He had given them the chance to believe that happy endings truly exist. Robert smiled, but was thoughtful. He looked at the girls blowing out the candles and realized they were his greatest achievement, greater than any company, any award, any recognition. There was the meaning of everything. There was the reason he had worked so hard, fought so hard, overcome so much. Julia was by his side, also moved. The two had developed a beautiful partnership over those years. They talked about the girls, shared worries and joys, and divided responsibilities naturally. Robert deeply respected her work and Julia admired his dedication. It was a professional relationship, but also a genuine friendship, built on a foundation of trust and the common goal of making those three girls happy. It was around this time that Robert began to attend more sophisticated business events again. His businesses were expanding, and he needed to maintain certain important relationships. It was at one of these events, a charity dinner at the Shard, that he met Veronica Castle. Veronica was everything that drew attention: tall, elegant, dressed in designer clothes that seemed to have been designed especially for her body. Perfectly styled blonde hair falling over her shoulders, flawless makeup, discreet but expensive jewelry. She spoke with a melodious voice, laughed at the right times, and had intelligent comments about art, politics, and business. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine cover. She approached Robert during the cocktail hour and started a casual conversation about the social work he did through his company. She showed genuine interest, or so it seemed, in his story. Robert, who hadn't been romantically interested in anyone for years, felt something different. Veronica was sophisticated, articulate, and had a magnetic presence. And most importantly, she showed an interest in meeting the girls, which was fundamental for Robert. The two began to see each other more frequently. Dinners, events, long conversations about life and future plans. Veronica always had sweet words, always showed understanding, and always seemed to be the perfect person. Robert, who had built an empire using intuition and sharp business perception, somehow couldn't apply those same skills to his love life. He was enchanted, even in love, with the woman who seemed to be exactly what he was looking for. But not all that glitters is gold, and not every smile hides kindness. Veronica had a side that Robert did not yet know, a side she hid very well, when she was in the spotlight or in his presence. Veronica did not love Robert. Veronica loved what Robert represented: power, money, status, access to the highest circles of London's high society. For her, the businessman was a perfect stepping stone to get where she had always wanted to be. And the three girls. Well, for Veronica, Laura, Marina, and Helena were just obstacles in the way. Three little inconveniences that would have to be tolerated until she consolidated her position and could mold that family to her liking. But Robert didn't know that yet. He was still living the illusion of having finally found the woman with whom he would build the next chapter of his life. The first signs were too subtle to be noticed. A disguised impatience, a sharp comment turned into a joke, a look of contempt quickly replaced by a smile. Julia was the first to notice. A woman from the outskirts doesn't survive without developing a sharp perception of character. She saw that Veronica treated the girls with a mechanical coldness, only playing the part when Robert was present. She also saw how Veronica treated the household staff, with a veiled arrogance that made everyone uncomfortable. But whenever Julia tried delicately to share her concerns with Robert, Veronica was one step ahead. She created convincing narratives, reversed situations, and made Robert doubt his own perceptions. She said that Julia was jealous, that it was natural for an employee to feel threatened by the presence of a new female figure in the house, that it was all just a misunderstanding. Robert, inexperienced in relationships and blinded by what he thought was love, believed Veronica. After all, she was affectionate with him, showed interest in his life, and said beautiful things about wanting to build a family. How could she be the terrible person Julia was suggesting? He dismissed the warnings as exaggerations and moved on, growing ever closer to Veronica. And so, without realizing it, Robert was heading towards a revelation that would change everything. A truth that was hidden behind calculated smiles and sweet words. A reality he would only see when it was no longer possible to ignore. The triplets, meanwhile, became quieter and quieter. The sparkle in their eyes dimmed a little each day. They couldn't name what they were feeling, but they knew something was wrong. That woman, their daddy, brought home, didn't look at them with affection. She didn't really play with them. She didn't care when they spoke. And there were times when their daddy wasn't looking, that her gaze became so cold it was frightening. But Robert was too busy planning the future, dreaming of a complete family, imagining the perfect wedding, too busy to see that the nightmare had already walked in through the front door, dressed in elegance and expensive perfume, smiling a smile that never reached her eyes. And life went on as it always does, carrying everyone towards the inevitable moment of truth. That moment when masks fall and reality finally reveals itself, without mercy and without return. The relationship between Robert and Veronica progressed like a high-speed train. 3 months after their first meeting, she already had keys to the penthouse. 6 months later, her wardrobe occupied half of the main closet. 9 months later, Robert proposed in an expensive restaurant with a view of the illuminated city, and Veronica accepted with tears that seemed genuine, but were as calculated as every step she had taken to get there. The news of the engagement was received with joy in Robert's social circles. Friends and partners congratulated the couple, saying they were perfect for each other, that Veronica would be a wonderful mother to the girls. But inside the penthouse, the reality was very different. Veronica's mask was beginning to slip more and more. Laura was the first to voice her discomfort. One afternoon when Robert had gone out to deal with business matters, the 5-year-old approached Julia in the kitchen. Her brown eyes were worried, and her voice came out quieter than usual. She said she didn't like it when Auntie Veronica got angry. Julia knelt down to the girl's level and asked what had happened. Laura told her that Veronica had shouted at them because Marina had spilled juice on the living room rug. She said she had called the 3 of them clumsy and told them to stay locked in their room until their father came home. Julia felt her blood boil but remained calm. She hugged Laura affectionately and said that everything would be all right. Later, when Robert arrived, Julia asked to speak with him privately. She told him what had happened, choosing her words carefully so as not to seem like she was attacking Veronica. Robert listened attentively, but his expression showed skepticism. He said he would talk to Veronica, that there must have been some misunderstanding, and that's exactly what Veronica did when confronted. She changed the story. She said the girls had made a huge mess on purpose to test her, that she had only firmly asked them to go to their room to think about what they had done, that she never shouted or used harsh words. She added that Julia was trying to turn him against her, that it was obvious the caregiver felt threatened by the presence of another woman in the house. Robert, wanting to believe the woman he was in love with, gave Veronica the benefit of the doubt. Julia realized she needed to be more strategic. She couldn't make direct accusations because Veronica always had a ready answer, always turned the tables in her favor. So she decided to just observe and be present as much as possible when Veronica was with the girls. Her priority was to protect Laura, Marina, and Helena, even if it meant swallowing the frustration of not being able to open Robert's eyes. The weeks that followed were increasingly tense. Veronica began to impose absurd rules. The girls couldn't play in the living room because she was hosting friends for tea and didn't want a mess. They couldn't watch cartoons with the volume up because she had migraines. They couldn't run through the corridors because the noise irritated her. The penthouse, which was once a home full of life and laughter, began to feel like a museum where children were not welcome. Marina, the most dreamy of the 3, suffered the most. She loved to draw and create stories, living in a world of imagination. One day she was in her room making a special, drawing for her father when Veronica entered without knocking. The girl was using new felt-tip pens that Robert had given her. Veronica looked at the drawing and made a cutting remark about how ugly and disproportionate it was. Marina, only 5 years old, felt the words like punches. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry in front of Veronica. She waited for the woman to leave, tore up the drawing, and never wanted to draw again when she was nearby. Helena, the quietest one, developed a different defense mechanism. She simply disappeared. When Veronica arrived, Helena would go to her room and stay there, playing alone in silence. Robert even commented to Julia that he found it strange how isolated Helena had become lately. Julia took a deep breath and said that perhaps the girl needed more of his attention, that children sense when the family dynamic changes. Robert promised to spend more time with his daughters, but the promise always ran up against work demands and Veronica's expectations, who monopolized his every free moment. The penthouse staff also began to suffer from Veronica's presence. Mrs. Teresa, who had worked as a cook for Robert for over 10 years, was publicly humiliated when she prepared a dish that Veronica deemed inadequate. The woman, who was almost 60 and treated Robert like a son, left the kitchen in tears. Mr. Jackson, the trusted driver who had been with Robert since his early days of success, was sharply reprimanded for not opening the car door quickly enough for Veronica to get out. Julia saw all of this and felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. She tried a few more times to warn Robert, always delicately, always pointing out specific situations. But Veronica was too quick. She always had an explanation, always reversed the narrative, always made it seem like Julia was the problematic one, the envious one, the one who wanted to cause discord. And Robert, blinded by what he believed was love, by the promise of a complete family, by the idea of finally having a partner, believed Veronica. What Robert couldn't see was that Veronica didn't love him. She loved the lifestyle, the social events, the jewelry he gifted her, the expensive restaurants, the international trips, the prestige of being by the side of a respected businessman. She loved the possibility of finally belonging to the elite. She had always observed from afar with envy. She loved the power that relationship gave her. On a Tuesday night, Robert returned from a trip earlier than expected. It was around 10 o'clock, and he decided not to call ahead, wanting to surprise the girls. He entered the penthouse using his key and heard voices coming from the living room. It was Veronica and two of her friends, Patricia and Fernanda, women of the same ilk, elegant on the outside and empty on the inside. Robert was about to announce himself when he heard his own name mentioned. He stopped, in the hallway hidden by the wall, and heard a conversation that chilled his blood. Veronica was laughing as she told her friends how easy it was to manipulate Robert. She said he was naive, that he believed everything she said, that all she had to do was play the victim and blame the maid, and he would always take her side. Her friends laughed along, agreed, and made malicious comments. Then, Patricia asked about the triplets. Veronica responded with a coldness that cut through the air. She said the girls were a nuisance, that they made too much noise, that she didn't understand why Robert had adopted three at once. She said that as soon as they were married, she would suggest putting the girls in boarding schools far away so they could have some peace. She added that deep down, Robert would also get tired of playing father, and that it would be easy to convince him that the girls would be better off being educated away from home. Robert felt his legs go weak. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the woman he was going to marry, speaking that way about his daughters, about the loves of his life. He wanted to storm into the living room and confront Veronica right then and there, but something held him back. An inner voice telling him he needed more proof, that he needed to be absolutely sure before taking any action. He left the penthouse in silence, went back to his car and sat there for almost an hour, trying to process what he had heard. Had he misinterpreted it? Was it just someone venting after a tiring day? But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. He knew that Julia had been right all along. He knew that the changes in the girl's behavior were no coincidence. He knew he had been a fool. In the following days, Robert began to observe everything more closely. He saw how Veronica changed completely when she realized he was watching, how the smile appeared out of nowhere, how her voice became sweet, how her words turned affectionate. And he also saw how it all disappeared when she thought she wasn't being watched. The cold looks towards the girls, the poorly disguised impatience, the sharp comments. Robert felt disgusted. Disgusted with Veronica, but mostly disgusted with himself for having been so blind, for putting his daughters in such an uncomfortable situation, for ignoring the warnings from Julia, who had always been on their side. But he still didn't know how to act. Ending the engagement at that moment, without a clear and public reason, would allow Veronica to play the victim, spread stories, perhaps even try to sue. She was too smart to leave obvious traces. It was then that fate, or life, or whatever it is that organizes important events, began to set the stage for the final revelation. December arrived, bringing the colorful Christmas lights all over London, the decorated shops, the shopping centers full of families, the Christmas carols playing on every corner. It was Robert's favorite time of year because he had created a special tradition. Every year, on Christmas Eve, Robert did something few people knew about. He would dress up as Santa Claus and go to the shopping center he had opened 3 years earlier in the East End of the city, in a more humble area. There, he would distribute gifts to the community's children, take photos, listen to their wishes, and spread joy. No one knew that beneath the costume and the white beard was the owner of the shopping center, the millionaire businessman. To everyone, he was just another Santa Claus hired to liven up the holiday. Robert loved doing this. It was his way of giving back, of connecting with his roots, of remembering where he came from. And most importantly, it was a time when he was just love and generosity, without social labels, without business obligations, without masks. The Triplets knew about the tradition and thought it was wonderful, but Robert always asked them to keep it a secret because he wanted to keep it simple and genuine. That year, Robert planned to do the same. He told Veronica he would need to travel quickly on Christmas Eve to resolve an urgent matter in another city. She didn't seem to mind much. She was more interested in planning the holiday parties where she could show off her engagement ring and be the envy of other women. Julia, who knew Robert's tradition well, realized that this could be an important moment. She had been observing Veronica's behavior with growing concern. The girls were clearly unhappy, quieter, less spontaneous. Julia couldn't bear to see it anymore. She had to do something that would show Robert unquestionably who Veronica really was. Then she had an idea. On Christmas Eve, she suggested to Veronica that she take the girls for an outing to the shopping center. She said it would be good for the Triplets to get out of the house, see the Christmas decorations, have some ice cream and feel the holiday spirit. Veronica hesitated at first, but then agreed. She saw it as an opportunity to go shopping, buy new clothes for the holiday parties, and spend the credit card Robert had given her. If you were in Julia's place, would you have created this situation to expose the truth? Or would you have waited longer for concrete proof? Tell us in the comments. Julia discreetly called Robert and told him about the outing. She said she thought it was important for him to be nearby, that she had a feeling something revealing might happen. Robert understood the message. They agreed that he would go to the shopping center as he always did, dressed as Santa Claus, and stay alert. On the morning of the 24th of December, Veronica woke up in a good mood. She was excited about the prospect of spending money and buying things for herself. The girls were also excited, because an outing was always better than being stuck at home. Julia dressed the three of them in matching outfits, combed their hair with care, and told them to have a wonderful day. The shopping center was packed, families everywhere, excited children running around, salespeople offering last-minute promotions. The Christmas decoration was enchanting, with a giant tree in the center of the food court, and a special throne where Santa Claus received the children. Veronica went straight to the designer shops. She tried on expensive clothes, while the Triplets sat on uncomfortable benches waiting. Laura tried to ask if they could go see Santa Claus, but Veronica said no, that it was for poor children, and they didn't need that. The girls looked at each other sadly, but didn't insist. After spending a fortune on clothes she didn't even need, Veronica finally agreed to go to the food court. She bought ice cream for the girls, more to keep them quiet than out of kindness. She sat at a table and started scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring the three of them. Robert was there, just a few meters away, sitting on Santa's throne. The costume was complete, with a well-placed white beard, round glasses, a loose red suit, and black boots. No one would recognize the sophisticated businessman underneath. He received the children with affection, asked them what they wanted for Christmas, and gave out hugs and smiles. But his eyes were fixed on the table where Veronica and the girls were sitting. It was then that the incident happened that would change everything. Marina, with her dreamy and clumsy nature, got up from her chair holding her ice cream cone. She was looking at Santa Claus with that sparkle in her eyes that children have when they see magic happening. She didn't see the backpack someone had left on the floor. She tripped, lost her balance, and the ice cream flew out of her hand. The ice cream fell on the shiny porcelain floor of the shopping center, spreading a pink strawberry stain right in the middle of the corridor. Marina looked at it, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. Not because of the lost ice cream, but because of what she knew was coming next. And it came. Veronica shot up from the table as if she had been electrocuted. Her face turned red with anger. She looked around and saw people staring at the scene. She felt ashamed, that foolish shame of someone who cares more about appearances than feelings. And all the anger, all the frustration, all the contempt she felt for the girls, and had been repressing when there were witnesses, finally overflowed. She grabbed Marina by the arm forcefully, making the girl cry out in pain. Then, in a voice loud enough for everyone around to hear, she ordered the 3 girls to clean the ice cream off the floor using their own clothes. She said they were clumsy, useless, that they were good for nothing, that they were always embarrassing her. Laura and Helena rushed to their sister's side, frightened. Marina was now crying uncontrollably, not just because of the words, but because of the pain in her arm where Veronica had squeezed so hard. Some people stopped to watch the scene, shocked by the treatment. But no one intervened, because in the middle of a Christmas shopping center, no one wants to get involved in other people's conflicts. Julia, who had stayed a few meters, behind on purpose, saw everything and ran over. She placed herself between Veronica and the girls, protecting the 3 of them with her body. She said firmly that she would not let that happen, that the girls were not to blame, that it had been an accident. Veronica, now out of control, lunged at Julia. She raised her voice even higher, saying that Julia was just an employee and had no right to question her, that she was Robert's future wife, and that from now on things would be her way. And it was at that exact moment, with Veronica screaming, the girls crying, and Julia protecting the 3 of them like a lioness defending her cubs, that Robert witnessed everything. He had stood up from his throne as soon as he saw the ice cream fall. He had taken a few steps towards them, but stopped when he saw how the situation was unfolding. He stood there a few meters away, hidden behind the Santa Claus costume, seeing with his own eyes the true face of the woman he had almost married. He saw the violence in Veronica's gesture as she grabbed Marina. He saw the cruelty in the words she used. He saw the contempt in her eyes as she looked at his daughters. He saw the humiliation she was trying to impose. And he also saw Julia's courage, who, despite being just the caregiver, despite risking her job, stood in front to protect the girls. Robert's heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. The anger he felt in that instant was greater than any anger he had ever felt in his life. He wanted to rip off the costume right there, to shout, to throw Veronica out of that shopping center and, out of their lives forever. But he controlled himself. Because he realized that this moment needed to be witnessed by more people, it needed to be undeniable, it needed to be final. Robert walked over to where they were, still dressed as Santa Claus, still with the beard covering his face. He knelt down to the girl's level and said in a soft voice that it was okay, that it was just an accident, that another ice cream could be bought. But the love of children was the most important gift in the world. The triplets looked at this Santa Claus with gratitude. They didn't know it was their father underneath. Then Robert stood up and looked directly at Veronica. Even with the costume, his eyes conveyed something she had never seen before. An authority, a firmness, a truth that could not be denied. He said, still disguising his voice, that she should be ashamed of herself for treating children that way, that people like her didn't deserve to be near innocence, that the true Christmas spirit was love and not cruelty. Veronica was disconcerted. She didn't expect to be confronted by a shopping center Santa Claus. She was about to respond with some rudeness when she looked around and realized that dozens of people were standing there, looking at her with disapproval. Some were filming with their phones. She felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Her reputation, her carefully constructed image, everything was crumbling right there in the middle of that shopping center. She tried to smile, tried to downplay it, said she had been misunderstood, that she was just disciplining the girls. But the words came out weak, without conviction. Everyone had seen and heard. There was no way to deny or reverse it. That was when Robert finally took off his beard and revealed his face. The silence that fell was deafening. Veronica turned as white as a sheet. Her legs gave way. She looked at Robert, unable to process what was happening. He had been there the whole time. He had seen everything. There was no escape, no more lies that would work, no way to manipulate the situation. Robert didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice came out low but laden with disappointment and firmness. He said the engagement was over, that she should remove her things from the penthouse by the end of the day, that he never wanted to see her near his daughters again. He said he had been a fool for not believing Julia, for not seeing the signs, for putting his daughters in such a difficult situation. And he apologized right there, in front of everyone, to the 3 girls and to Julia. Veronica tried to argue, tried to explain herself, tried to reverse the situation one more time, but Robert gave her no room. He called the shopping centre security and asked them to escort her to the car park. She left, humiliated, shattered, watching her entire plan crumble before dozens of witnesses. Robert then knelt down again and hugged the three girls with all his might. He apologized for not protecting them sooner, for being blind, for letting that woman hurt them. Laura, Marina, and Helena hugged him back, crying. But now they were tears of relief. Daddy was back. Daddy had seen the truth. Daddy had chosen them. Julia was there beside them, also moved. Robert stood up and hugged her too, thanking her for never giving up on the girls, for being the protection they needed when he had failed. He said she was much more than a caregiver, that she was family. The entire shopping centre seemed to have stopped to watch the scene. Some people applauded, others cried along. It was Christmas Eve, and there, in the middle of that food court, a family had been reunited. Not in the perfect way Robert had imagined, but in the true way that life offers when we finally open our eyes. The days that followed that 24th of December were ones of healing and rebuilding. Robert took 2 weeks off work, something he had never done since opening his first shop. He delegated everything to his trusted managers and decided that those weeks would be entirely dedicated to the girls. He needed to make up for lost time, to show them that they were the absolute priority in his life. The first thing he did was sit down with Laura, Marina, and Helena and have an honest conversation. He explained, in language that 5-year-olds could understand, that he had made a huge mistake. He said that Auntie Veronica was not a good person and that he hadn't realized it in time. He apologized for not believing them when they showed discomfort, for not listening to the signs that were so clear. The girls, with the capacity for forgiveness that only children have, said it was okay, that Daddy would always be the best daddy in the world. Robert also had a long talk with Julia. This time, there was no rush, no interruptions, no distractions. They sat on the living room sofa while the girls played in their room, and he finally heard everything Julia had been trying to tell him over those difficult months. Every observation she had made, every warning she had given, every concern she had shared. Robert listened attentively, ashamed of himself, and immensely grateful to have someone so genuinely concerned about the triplets' well-being by their side. He apologized to Julia as well. He said he had been arrogant to think he knew Veronica better than she did, that he had been unfair to dismiss her concerns, that he had placed his own desire for a complete family above his daughter's emotional security. Julia, with the serenity she always had, said she understood. She said that love sometimes makes us blind, that she held no grudge, that the important thing was that everything was okay now. But something had changed between them. A connection that had always existed but that neither of them had named began to become more evident. It was in the glances they exchanged when the girls did something funny, in the way Robert started asking for Julia's opinion on absolutely everything related to the triplets, in the way she smiled when he came home. There was a complicity there that went beyond the professional, a partnership that was becoming more like something greater each day. The girls were the first to notice. Laura, always observant, commented one day that Daddy was happy when Jules was around. Marina, dreamy as ever, said they looked like the prince and princess from fairy tales. Helena, more reserved, just smiled and said she liked it when they were all together. The innocence of children sometimes sees truths that adults take a long time to accept. Robert began to notice things he had never noticed before. The way Julia sang while preparing breakfast, always old songs her mother used to sing. The infinite patience she had to answer the thousands of questions Marina asked about absolutely everything. The affection with which she combed Helena's hair, even when the girl complained it was pulling. The pride on her face when Laura managed to read a new word on her own. Julia wasn't just an excellent employee, she loved those girls as if they were her own, and Robert realized he loved her too. But the feeling scared him. After all, he had just come out of a disastrous relationship where he had been completely deceived. How could he trust his own judgment? How could he know if what he felt was real or just gratitude for her having protected the girls? He decided not to act rashly. He didn't want to make the same mistakes. He didn't want to put Julia in an uncomfortable position. He didn't want to risk losing someone so important to the triplets' lives. Julia, for her part, also struggled with confused feelings. She had always admired Robert from the very first day. She admired his story of overcoming adversity, his dedication to his daughters, his generosity with those who worked for him. Over time, that admiration had turned into something deeper. But she would never allow those feelings to show. She was the girl's caregiver. She had a function, a defined role. She couldn't cross that line. Besides, she came from the outskirts, didn't have the same social standing, didn't move in the same circles. It would be ridiculous to think that someone like Robert Miller could be truly interested in someone like her. So the two continued in a careful dance of unspoken feelings, of glances that said more than words, of a closeness that grew without either of them having the courage to name what was happening. And the girls watched it all with the instinctive wisdom of children, silently hoping that the adults would be less complicated. January arrived, bringing intense heat and a return to routine. Robert went back to work but completely changed how he managed his time. He no longer accepted meetings after 6 in the evening. He didn't travel on weekends. He prioritized being present for the girls' important moments, even if it meant delegating more or missing some business opportunities. He had learned the hard way that professional success means nothing if you lose the people you love in the process. The triplets went back to school. It was a private early childhood institution in Notting Hill, with a playful and welcoming educational approach. The teachers adored the three of them, and always commented on how polite and affectionate they were. That year, something interesting happened. The teacher asked each child to draw a picture of their family. Laura drew herself, her sisters, her father, and next to everyone, a female figure she identified as Jules. Marina did the same, placing Julia right in the center of the drawing, surrounded by everyone. Helena, more minimalist, drew 4 figures holding hands and wrote underneath, in the shaky handwriting of a child who is learning, family. When Robert was called for a parent-teacher meeting and saw the drawings displayed, on the classroom's notice board, he felt his heart tighten. There was the simple, clear truth that only children can express without fear. Julia wasn't just the caregiver. She was part of the family. The girls saw her that way. And him? He was starting to see it too. It was in February, during a bank holiday festival, that everything began to change for good. Robert wasn't one for festivities, never had been. But the girls wanted to see the street parades, wanted to feel the joy of the whole city decorated and celebrating. Julia suggested they go together to the children's parade happening in Hyde Park. It was family-friendly, safe and fun. Robert agreed. The 5 of them went, dressed in colorful and comfortable clothes. The girls wore glittery headbands and had their faces painted by Julia. Robert carried a backpack with water, snacks and sunscreen. They looked like an ordinary family in the midst of thousands of other ordinary families. And that was exactly what Robert wanted most at that moment. To be ordinary, to be normal, to be just a father enjoying an outing with his daughters and the woman he was beginning to love. The afternoon was perfect. The girls jumped, danced and laughed until they couldn't anymore. Robert took hundreds of photos. Julia sang along with the songs, taught the triplets dance steps, and bought cotton candy and ice lollies for everyone. At one point, a more upbeat song started playing, and Laura pulled her father to dance. Marina and Helena did the same with Julia. And in the middle of the dance, Robert and Julia looked at each other. It was one of those moments that seemed to happen in slow motion. The world around them faded into the background, the noise subsided, and there were only those 2 gazes meeting and saying everything that words didn't have the courage to express. Marina, sensing the moment, shouted loudly, "Look, Daddy and Jules are dating!" The people around them laughed, finding it amusing. Robert and Julia automatically moved apart, both blushing, both laughing awkwardly, both secretly wishing Marina was right. Helena and Laura supported their sister, saying it would be really cool if it were true, that they looked good together. The innocence of the children had put into words what the 2 of them had been avoiding admitting. On the way back home, with the girls asleep in the back of the car, tired from the festivities, Robert and Julia talked about the elephant in the room for the first time. He said carefully that he had feelings for her but didn't want to pressure her, that he understood their relationship was professional and that he would respect whatever she decided. Julia was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then she said, with the honesty she always had, that she also felt something, had been feeling it for a long time, but she was afraid. Afraid of ruining everything, afraid of losing the job she loved, afraid of not being enough for someone like him. Robert stopped the car in an empty car park. He looked at Julia with an intensity that made her shiver. He said she was the most extraordinary person he had ever met. He said he had never known anyone with such a beautiful heart, such genuine dedication, such inspiring strength. He said she was enough, more than enough, that she was perfect, just the way she was. He said he came from the same reality as her, that he understood the struggles, that he would never judge her for her background. He said he wanted to try if she wanted to as well, but in her own time, without rushing, respecting every step. Julia felt the tears stream down. They were tears of relief, of happiness, of hope. She said yes, that she wanted to try too, that she was very scared, but that if they took it slow, maybe they could build something beautiful. And there, in that car park, with the 3 girls sleeping in the back seat, Robert and Julia kissed for the first time. It was a soft, careful kiss, full of promise and full of respect. The following months were about discovery. They didn't tell the girls immediately. They wanted to be sure that what they had was real and lasting before involving the triplets. But it's impossible to hide love from children. Laura noticed how much happier her father was, how he hummed around the house, how he smiled more. Marina noticed how much prettier Jules looked, how she dressed with more care, how her eyes shone differently. Helena saw how the 2 of them looked at each other when they thought no one was watching, how they found excuses to be near one another. One day, Laura simply asked if Daddy and Jules were boyfriend and girlfriend now. Robert and Julia looked at each other. They decided to be honest. They said yes, they were dating, but asked how the girls felt about it. The answer came in the form of a group hug. The 3 of them jumped on top of the 2, shouting with happiness, saying it was about time, that now they were a real family. And they were. Not in the traditional way, not in the way Robert had imagined when he started dating Veronica. It was better. It was real. It was built on genuine love, mutual respect, and a shared past of overcoming challenges. Julia continued to live in the staff quarters for a while because they both agreed they didn't want to rush things. But now she had dinner with everyone at the table, watched films together on the sofa, and participated in family decisions. The transition was natural because deep down she had always been family. Now they were just making it official. The household staff loved it. Mrs. Teresa said the boss had finally found a real woman, a woman of value. Mr. Jackson joked that it had taken a while, but Dr. Robert had finally opened his eyes to what was right in front of him all along. Everyone saw how different Julia was from Veronica, not because of her appearance or social status, but because of her essence, her character, the way she treated people. Robert took Julia to meet some close friends. He was pleased to see that his true friends, the ones who mattered, welcomed Julia with warmth and respect. Some of the businessmen he knew from events also treated her well, and those who raised their eyebrows or made snide comments, well, Robert simply cut them out of his social circle. He no longer had patience for people who judged worth by a surname or a bank account. Julia's mother, Mrs. Marlene, was invited to see the penthouse. She was a simple, hard-working woman who had raised Julia on her own after her father abandoned them. She arrived clearly nervous, clutching her old handbag tightly, looking at everything with a certain suspicion. But Robert welcomed her with the same respect he showed everyone. He offered her coffee, talked about life in the neighborhood where she lived, and asked about her stories. The triplets called her Grandma from the first minute, and Mrs. Marlene melted. She left in tears of emotion, telling her daughter that this man was a blessing, that she was lucky, that she wholeheartedly approved. Everything was falling into place in a way that seemed almost unreal. Robert sometimes woke up in the middle of the night and looked around, half expecting to find it was all a dream. But it wasn't. It was real. He had 3 wonderful daughters, an incredible woman by his side, had rediscovered the balance between work and personal life, and had learned difficult but necessary lessons about discernment and priorities. It was in June, on a rainy Saturday, that Robert made his final decision. He was lying on the sofa with Julia, watching the girls play school in the living room. Laura was the teacher, Marina the disruptive student, and Helena the studious one. It was an ordinary, everyday scene, nothing special. But for Robert, it was everything. It was happiness in its purest form, and he didn't want to spend another day without making it official. He called Julia into the bedroom to talk. She was worried, thinking something was wrong. Robert asked her to sit down. He knelt in front of her, which confused her even more. Then he took a velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not as ostentatious as the one he had given Veronica, but infinitely more meaningful. It was a delicate ring with a small but flawless diamond, chosen with care and love. Robert said he knew their courtship had been relatively short if counted in months, but it felt like a lifetime if counted in shared experiences. He said she was already family, already the girl's mother in her heart, already the most important person in his life. He said he didn't want to wait any longer, that he was sure that he wanted to spend the rest of his life by her side. He asked if she would marry him. Julia couldn't answer immediately. She was crying uncontrollably, her hands trembling, her heart beating so hard she could hear it. She had dreamed of this moment for months, but never imagined it would actually happen. Finally, she managed to speak, an emotional yes repeated several times between sobs. Robert placed the ring on her finger and kissed her with all the love he felt. They held each other for minutes, crying together, laughing together, thanking fate for bringing them together in such a way. Then they heard a noise at the door. The three girls were there, peeking, with huge smiles on their faces. They had seen everything. Robert and Julia laughed and called the three of them to join the group hug. It was one of the most beautiful moments any of them had ever experienced. The wedding was set for December, on Christmas Eve, not by chance. Robert wanted it on that date because it was when the truth had come to light, when he had finally seen who really mattered, when life had put everything in its proper place. It would be a way to celebrate not only their union, but also the rebirth of their family. The preparations were made with joy and everyone's participation. The girls chose their own dresses, all different but coordinating. Robert dismissed the need for a huge party. He wanted something intimate, with only the people who truly mattered. Julia agreed. They didn't need ostentation to prove their love. And so, as the year drew to a close, that family, that had been through so much, finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. They had learned about forgiveness, about new beginnings, about the difference between appearance and substance. They had discovered that family is not defined by blood or surname, but by love, loyalty, and presence. They had understood that sometimes the greatest gifts in life come wrapped in the simplest and most unexpected forms. And most importantly, they had each other. And that, they discovered, was all they needed. The last months of the year passed by at an incredible speed. While London prepared for the end-of-year festivities, the Kensington penthouse was undergoing its own special preparation. The wedding was set for the 24th of December, at 5 in the afternoon, in a private garden of a boutique hotel in Mayfair. Robert and Julia had opted for an intimate ceremony, with only 50 guests, all people who were truly important in their lives. The Triplets were involved in every detail. They helped choose the flowers, tasted the buffet sweets more times than necessary, and made sure to give their opinion on everything. Laura wanted real butterflies to be released at the end of the ceremony. Marina insisted that the bride's entrance music had to be from a princess movie. Helena, more practical, only asked for plenty of chocolate cake. Robert and Julia granted each request with smiles, happy to include the girls in everything. Mrs. Marlene, Julia's mother, was radiant. In recent months, she had become a constant presence in the family's life. She came for lunch every week, helped with the girls when she could, and developed a beautiful relationship of mutual respect with Robert. She saw in her son-in-law not just a successful man, but someone with character, someone who valued her daughter for what truly mattered. And that, for Mrs. Marlene, was more precious than any material wealth. The story of Robert and Julia had spread through London's business circles. Some made malicious comments, finding the idea of a millionaire businessman marrying the former employee who cared for his daughters absurd. But most, especially those who truly knew Robert, celebrated the union. They saw a story of genuine love, of overcoming prejudice, of valuing what really matters in life. What no one knew was that the wedding held an even greater symbolism for Robert. He had kept a secret from everyone, including Julia, about a surprise he was preparing. A surprise that connected the past, present, and future in an emotional way. The week of the wedding, Robert went to the Sweet Comfort home, the orphanage where it had all begun. Mrs. Margaret was still the director and welcomed him with the tight hug of someone seeing a son return. They talked at length about the girls, about how they were growing up healthy and happy, about how life had settled down. Robert then made a special request. He wanted Mrs. Margaret to be one of the bridesmaids. With tears in her eyes, she accepted immediately. But there was more. Robert said he wanted all the children from the orphanage to be invited to the party. He wanted them to sit at the tables, eat from the same buffet, play in the same space, and feel included. Mrs. Margaret was speechless. It was a gesture of immense generosity, but more than that, it was a gesture of recognition. Robert did not forget where his daughters came from. He was not ashamed of their story. On the contrary, he celebrated that origin as a fundamental part of who they were. The day before the wedding, the house was in organized chaos. Hairdressers, makeup artists, florists, and decorators came and went. Julia was visibly nervous, checking and rechecking every detail. The girls ran from one side to the other, trying on their new shoes that they could hardly wait to wear. Robert watched everything from a distance, with a calm smile on his face. He had been through so many tense meetings, so many difficult negotiations, so many moments of business pressure, but nothing compared to the pure and simple emotion of that moment. At night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Robert stood alone, on the balcony, looking at the illuminated city. He thought about his entire journey. The poor boy from Brixton who carried bags at the market, the teenager who got his hands greasy in the workshop, the young man who bet all his savings on a tiny shop, the businessman who built an empire but almost lost what truly mattered along the way, and the father who finally learned that true success is not measured in money, but in shared love and moments lived with intensity. The wedding day dawned sunny with the characteristic warmth of a London summer. The house woke up early, in a mixture of anxiety and joy. Julia could barely eat breakfast, she was so nervous. The girls, on the other hand, ate as if there were no tomorrow, too excited to feel any tension. Mrs. Marlene arrived around 10 in the morning to help her daughter. She brought with her the veil she had worn at her own wedding decades ago. It was simple, made of white tulle, slightly yellowed with time. Julia cried upon receiving it. She knew that veil represented all the generations of hard-working women in her family, all who had fought, suffered, and persevered. It would be an honor to wear that symbol on the most important day of her life. At 3 in the afternoon, everyone began to get ready. The hotel had provided suites for the bride and groom to prepare separately. Robert wore a tailor-made navy blue suit, elegant but not ostentatious. He chose a burgundy tie that Julia had said she loved. Mr. Jackson, who would be one of the witnesses, helped adjust his cufflinks with the affection of an old friend. The two talked about the paths of life, about how sometimes everything falls into place in unexpected ways. Julia was in the suite with the girls, Mrs. Marlene, and 2 childhood friends she had invited. The dress was stunning in its simplicity. Classic white, a mermaid cut that flattered her silhouette, with long, delicate lace sleeves. Her hair was styled in an elegant bun with loose strands framing her face. The makeup enhanced her natural beauty without being overdone. When she put on her mother's veil and looked in the mirror, Julia barely recognized herself. She looked like a princess, but a real flesh-and-blood princess with history and substance. The triplets wore identical dresses in style, but in different shades of pink: coral for Laura, dusty rose for Marina, and baby pink for Helena. They had crowns of natural flowers in their hair and silver ballet flats on their feet. They were absolutely beautiful and emotional. Laura held the bride's bouquet with the care of someone carrying a treasure. Marina rehearsed the steps she would take down the aisle. Helena just smiled, absorbing every moment with the quiet observation she always had. At 5 o'clock sharp, the guests were all seated in the garden. The setting was breathtaking. A walkway of white petals led to a gazebo decorated with arrangements of white roses and blue hydrangeas. White chairs were arranged in a semicircle, creating an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. The afternoon sun cast a perfect golden light, as if the universe itself were celebrating that moment. Robert stood beside the officiant, visibly emotional. He saw among the guests beloved faces, old employees, true friends, business partners who had become family. And he also saw, sitting in the front rows, the children from the orphanage. They were all dressed up in new clothes he had provided, looking at everything with a mixture of admiration and shyness. Mrs. Margaret sat beside them, crying discreetly, touched by the generosity of his gesture. The music began. It was an instrumental version of a song about true love, about finding the right person at the right time. The triplets entered first, scattering petals along the path. Laura walked with concentration. Marina smiled at everyone, and Helena followed her sisters with delicate steps. When they reached the end of the walkway, they stood next to their father, like the little bridesmaids they were. Then Julia appeared. She was escorted by her mother as she had no father to do the honor. But it didn't matter. Mrs. Marlene walked tall, proud, giving her daughter to the man who had proven worthy of her. Julia was radiant, not because the dress was beautiful or the makeup was perfect, but because her eyes shone with genuine happiness, because her smile was wide and true, because every step she took towards the altar was a step towards the future she had always dreamed of, but never dared to believe she could have. Robert saw her approaching, and the tears he had been holding back finally streamed down his face. He was not ashamed to cry. He was standing before the most incredible woman he had ever met, about to officially unite their lives, surrounded by the daughters he loved more than anything. It was too intense to contain the emotion. When Julia reached his side, Robert took her hands and whispered so softly that only she could hear, "You look perfect." Julia smiled and replied in the same tone, "We are perfect." And they were. The 5 of them there together, forming a family that had been built in an unconventional but absolutely true way. The ceremony was emotional. The officiant spoke about their journey, about how true love often arises in the most unexpected places, about how family is built on choice and dedication. He mentioned the triplets' story, how Robert found them, and how Julia welcomed them into her heart. He spoke of second chances, forgiveness, and new beginnings. The time came for the vows. Robert went first. He said that when he decided to adopt the girls, he thought he was complete. But he discovered something fundamental was missing. Someone to share the joys, the challenges, the achievements with. Someone who would look at his daughters with the same love he did. He, said Julia, was that person, that she had been there all along, protecting, caring, loving. He promised to honor her every day, to make her and the girls his absolute priority, to build a life based on truth and companionship. Julia, moved, said her vows with a trembling voice. She said she never imagined she would enter that house as a caregiver and leave as a wife and mother. She said Robert had given her not only love, but also the family she had always wanted. She said the triplets were the most precious gift of her life and that she promised to love, protect, and guide them always. She said she saw in Robert not just the successful man everyone saw, but above all, the dedicated father, the generous human being, the loyal partner. They exchanged rings with trembling hands. They were white gold bands, simple on the outside but engraved on the inside with the date and the initials of all 5. Robert, Julia, Laura, Marina, Helena. It was more than a union of a couple. It was the officialization of a family. The officiant declared them husband and wife and authorized the kiss. It was a long, promise-filled kiss, watched by all with applause and tears. The girls ran to hug them both, creating that perfect image of a united family. The photographers captured the moment from every possible angle, but it wasn't even necessary. That scene was already forever engraved in each of their hearts. The party that followed was joyful and relaxed. The food was delicious, the music lively, the people happy. The children from the orphanage integrated perfectly, played with the triplets. ate until they couldn't anymore, and took photos with the newlyweds. Robert made a point of sitting with each group of children, for a while talking, asking about their dreams. It was his way of giving back, of showing that he hadn't forgotten where he came from. During the party, Mrs. Margaret asked to speak. With an emotional voice, she told everyone how Robert had appeared at that orphanage years ago, soaked from the rain, not quite sure why he was there. How he had looked at 3 identical babies and decided without hesitation that they would be his daughters. How he had transformed 3 lives that began with loss into stories of love and hope. She said that was the true meaning of family, that Robert and Julia were examples that love builds bridges where prejudice erects walls. Robert responded to the speech with thanks. He thanked Mrs. Margaret for taking care of the girls until he arrived. He thanked all the guests for sharing that moment. He thanked Julia for being the protection the girls needed when he failed to see the truth. And he thanked the triplets for giving his life meaning, for being the reason for everything, the motive for every effort. But the final surprise was yet to come. Robert asked for 3 small boxes wrapped in gold paper to be brought out. He called the girls over to him and Julia. He said that now they were not just his daughters, they were also Julia's daughters, and to make that official, they had special gifts. Each box contained a delicate gold necklace with a pendant. Laura received a heart, representing her protective and loving nature. Marina got a star, symbolizing her dreams and imagination. Helena had an anchor, representing her stability and wisdom. But the most special part was engraved on the back of each pendant, the initials R.J. and the name of each girl. It was the complete family, connected in precious metal, a physical symbol of the union that already existed in everyone's hearts. The girls cried, Julia cried, Mrs. Marlene cried, half the guests cried. It was impossible not to be moved by the symbolic beauty of that gesture. The party went on late. There was dancing, there was laughter, there were tight hugs and promises of eternal friendship. But the best moment was when Robert and Julia managed to have a few minutes alone in the garden. They stood there embracing, looking at the hall where the girls were playing with other children. Robert said that a year ago on that very day, he had discovered who Veronica really was. He had seen his world collapse and rebuild itself in a matter of hours. He said that day, which could have been merely tragic, had actually been the turning point, the moment when everything realigned in the right way. Julia agreed. She said that sometimes life needs to show us what is not for us, to lead us to what is. They returned to the party hand in hand. The triplets ran to them asking to dance. Robert took Laura, and Helena, Julia took Marina, and the 5 of them danced together in the center of the hall. It wasn't a coordinated or elegant dance. It was messy, full of stepped-on toes and filled with laughter. But it was perfect. It was their family's dance, authentic and full of love. When the party ended and everyone had gone home, Robert, Julia, and the girls returned to the penthouse. The triplets were too tired and fell asleep in the car. Robert carried Helena, Julia carried Marina, and Laura, though sleepy, insisted on walking up because she was the eldest and needed to set an example. They put the 3 of them to bed, took off their dresses and put on comfortable pajamas. They kissed each one on the forehead, whispered words of love, and turned off the lights. Robert and Julia went to their room. It was now officially their room, no longer his room with Julia in the staff quarters. She had moved in the previous week and was still getting used to the idea that this space was hers too. They sat on the bed, still in their party clothes, tired but too happy to sleep immediately. They talked about the day, about every detail that had gone right, about the emotional speeches, about how beautiful the girls were. Robert took Julia's hand and looked at the wedding band that now decorated her finger. He said that ring represented much more than a marriage. It represented a journey of growth, of learning, of overcoming their own and others' prejudices. Julia rested her head on his shoulder and said she was grateful. Grateful for being brave enough to accept that job years ago. Grateful for staying firm when Veronica tried to push her away. Grateful for giving that love a chance when it appeared despite all her fears. And especially grateful for the 3 girls she had gained as daughters. They stayed there, in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. Outside, London continued its frantic pace. Cars honked, people walked hurriedly, the city never slept. But inside that penthouse there was peace, there was love, there was family. Robert thought about all the paths he had taken to get there, all the choices, all the mistakes, all the right moves. And he realized that every step, even the misguided ones, had been necessary for him to reach exactly that point. If he hadn't been blind with Veronica, perhaps he would never have valued Julia the way he did now. If he hadn't almost lost the girls emotionally, perhaps he would never have understood how much they were his reason for living. Life had a curious way of teaching, sometimes through pain, sometimes through surprise, sometimes through unlikely encounters on a rainy day in front of an orphanage, but always with a purpose, always directing us to where we need to be. And Robert was exactly where he needed to be, beside the woman he loved, with 3 daughters sleeping in the next room, in a home full of stories and promises for the future. He had built a business empire, yes, but his greatest construction, he realized, was this family, made of different patches, united by choice, strengthened by genuine love. Julia fell asleep first, still dressed, exhausted from the intense day. Robert covered her carefully, turned off the light, and lay down beside her. Before sleeping, he said a silent prayer of gratitude. He thanked for everything he had, for everything he had learned, for all the people life had placed in his path, and he asked for the wisdom to honor this family every day that was yet to come. From the girls' room, not a sound could be heard. The 3 of them slept deeply, dreaming the dreams of happy children. Laura dreamed she was flying over the city, protecting her sisters. Marina dreamed she was a princess in a castle made of sweets. Helena dreamed of numbers and colors, her unique way of processing the world. And all of them, in their private dreams, had the absolute certainty that they were loved. The story of Robert Miller, which began in a humble neighborhood on the outskirts, which went through glories and near stumbles, which learned difficult lessons about discernment and priorities, had reached its most beautiful chapter, not because it had a perfect fairy tale ending, but because it had a real present, built on a solid foundation of truth and dedication. And when the sun rose the next day, bringing the first day of their married life, the family woke up together, had breakfast surrounded by laughter, and began another page of the story they would continue to write together, a story of love that overcame social barriers, that conquered manipulation, that chose truth over appearance. A story that proved that family isn't about perfection, but about presence. It's not about origin, but about choice. It's not about ease, but about persistence. And they lived, not happily ever after in an unrealistic way, but happy in the truest sense of the word. With challenges, with growth, with abundant love, and with the certainty that together they could face whatever came their way. Because now there were 5 of them. They were strong. They were family. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert and Julia has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of true love, overcoming adversity and family, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which show that happy endings exist when built with truth and dedication. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions. Until then,